The gentleman's yielded back.
The gentlewoman has yielded back.
Under the Speaker.
Under the Speaker's announced policy of January 3, 2013, the Chair recognizes the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Garcia, for 30 minutes.
Very much, Mr. Speaker. I will yield in a moment, but I wanted to thank the gentleman from Colorado who's been having these sessions now for all the month of November. We began at the end of October and then through the session in December. He's been an ardent champion of this issue. He's been a leader in our caucus, and he's been doing the right thing. And I am very thankful for his efforts on our behalf. I'm going to yield to him so that we can begin this, and then I will address. But I wanted to mention last week when we were doing this, the Speaker made a ruling of probably something that I did incorrectly in my speech, but I want to recognize the gentleman from Colorado because he spoke for millions of those who have no voice, who cannot come to this floor and claim something that is so American, a system that works, a system that makes sense, a system that is fair to all its citizens, in fact, to all of its people. So with that, I'll yield back to the gentleman from Colorado.
I thank the gentleman from Florida, and I'll speak briefly, and then I'll have more later. There are so many activists in our country that are fasting, that are sitting in offices, that are writing their Congress people, that are demanding action, action to unite their families, action to stop the deportations of family members, answers to emerge from this indefinite state of limbo that has frozen the lives of so many would-be Americans that H.R. 15 and comprehensive immigration reform would address. Today, Mr. Speaker, I'm disappointed that our Republican friends didn't show up to discuss and debate the most pressing issue of our time, immigration reform. We extended an invitation to our friends on the other side of the aisle to join us today, to have a discussion. Sadly, there's no one here to yield to. There are no solutions from the empty chamber on the right. Some responded that they were double-booked. Others responded that they had other engagements. Some simply didn't respond at all. Well, the American people, Mr. Speaker, are demanding a response. Just as House Speaker Boehner plans to close for business Friday while hundreds of millions of Americans continue to have to work another week before Christmas, we have Reverend Samuel Rodriguez, who will mark the 40th day of his fast for immigration reform. He's chair of the National Hispanic Christian Leadership Conference, 40 days approaching fast and nights without solid food. As the Reverend said recently, there are 11 million people here right now that require intervention. We looked the other way when they came in. We used them on our farms, we used them in our hotels, and we used them in our restaurants, and then we have the audacity to deport them. It's morally reprehensible to play politics with 11 million people. So said Reverend Samuel Rodriguez nearing the 40th day of his fast, and yet in the entire first part of the 113th Congress, the entire first session, the entire year of 2013, there was only one vote on the floor on any measure relating to immigration. And was it a bill that would address even part of the immigration problem and a piece of the meal that were being promised? No, it was a bill to defund DACA, defund the Deferred Action Program, subjecting hundreds of thousands of dreamers to deportation. A bill that Republicans voted for and passed this body. Thankfully, it didn't become law. The Deferred Action Program continues. Thank goodness that it provides at least a temporary reprieve for hundreds of thousands of aspiring Americans. But we owe it to all Americans to restore the rule of law and allow people to get on with their lives. I yield to my colleague from Miami, The chief author of H.R. 15, the Comprehensive Immigration Reform Bill in the House, Mr. Garcia.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to thank my colleagues for joining me here tonight. We are here to discuss a vitally important issue. We need to pass comprehensive, common-sense immigration reform. We feel the consequences of our broken immigration system every day. We may not agree on the best way to go about fixing it, but a disagreement is no excuse for inaction. With every day that passes, millions continue to live in the shadows, and jobs continue slipping away overseas. This is not simply just an issue of fairness. It's about ensuring America's economic prospects. In Florida alone, legalizing those currently unauthorized to live would generate $1.3 billion in new tax revenue and create 97,000 new jobs. Fixing our broken immigration system will help small businesses expand, foster innovation, increase productivity, raise wages, and help create thousands of jobs. Comprehensive immigration reform makes all Americans better, makes our country richer, and creates opportunity for all. We must work together to find a solution that secures our borders, builds our economy, provides a way forward for millions of undocumented individuals living in the United States. This week, a group of children dropped by my office. They were dropping by to express their wish for the new year. Their families have been ripped apart by our immigration system, and they came to deliver letters from 1,000 children facing the same struggle. I'd like to share one of those letters with you. Dear Congress, my name is Charlie Hospena, and I'm Anthony's brother. I'm 11, and I'm in 5th grade. I'm writing to tell you about how my worst nightmare became real. Last year, my dad was taken away from us and sent to Mexico. We fought really hard to get him out of jail. I went to church, I prayed, we did projects, vigils, wrote letters, petitions. I behaved well in school. But the government did not listen. They don't care about us. I even thought about killing myself because I was sad that when bad things happen to people, and because I love my dad very much. I'm very angry at Congress and at Obama. It's really hard on me and Anthony and my mom. My mom, too, she keeps us safe and comfortable, but it's really hard for her, too. Every time I hear her crying, I feel sad. She cries because she misses him, and she has to find a lot of jobs cleaning houses to support us. So, Congress, please get your act together. I want immigration reform, please. You can do it. Do your job. Obama, you have the power to stop deporting. Congress, you are breaking families apart every day until you pass immigration reform. You have a chance to help families, so please do it now. What if immigration reform broke up your family? Would you like it? Now just close your eyes and imagine your family being destroyed. It's not a happy thought. It's a horrible feeling. It's like when somebody you care about dies. It's sad because you never see them again. I don't know how long I'm going to have to wait to see my dad back. No child or family should suffer like we did. Congress, we belong together. I hope you can understand what that means. Sincerely, Charlie. Charlie's right. We can't wait any longer. The time is now to pass comprehensive immigration reform. Although the Senate has acted in a bipartisan way to pass comprehensive immigration reform, the House of Representatives has not passed immigration reform bill in this Congress. It is unacceptable. Ultimately, all of us, Democrat and Republican alike, should want the same things: a secure border, a stronger middle class, and more jobs for the middle class. We should have a vigorous debate about this important issue, but a sensible one also that moves us forward. Unfortunately, that has not always been the case. Just last week, a colleague from Iowa compared allowing the undocumented to earn their citizenship as letting bank robbers walk away with the loot. This type of rhetoric has no place in this debate. We can do better. Our country demands we do better. Let's get this done. The time is now for comprehensive immigration reform. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'll yield back to the gentleman from Colorado.
I thank the gentleman from Florida, and what's particularly frustrating is that Congress is going home on December 13th, not to work for the remaining 2.5 weeks of the year. I think most Americans would love to get off a week early for Christmas. They don't have the opportunity to set their own schedule at work. So it's not like there's not time to do this, Mr. Speaker. We could stay here next week. It's not like there's not support on the floor to pass immigration reform, Mr. Speaker. There is. There is support today to pass H.R. 15, comprehensive immigration reform, brought to the floor. We could send it to President Obama's desk. What a Christmas gift to our country that would make. A Christmas gift in the form of reducing our deficit by over $200 billion, creating over 6 million jobs for American citizens, restoring real security, and finally gaining operational control over our southern border, and stemming the tide of people who are immigrating here illegally, requiring workplace authentication to make sure that employers no longer hire people under the table for cash outside of our system, strengthening Social Security and Medicare by making sure that people working here pay into our important programs that retirees stand to benefit from. Immigration reform is not only demanded, but widely popular. 6 in 10 Republicans support a path to citizenship for immigrants currently living in the United States, and a vast majority of every group, age, gender, ethnicity here in our country knows that our immigration system is broken. When we look at ourselves in the mirror at night, Mr. Speaker, how can we be proud of a system that betrays our values as a nation of laws and a nation of immigrants? A system that rewards law-breaking, a system that encourages illegal activity, a system that, as my good friend and colleague, Ms. Lofgren from California, likes to say, effectively places 2 signs at our southern border. One says help wanted and the other says keep out. That is the state of our current immigration system. Confusing, expensive, job-destroying. Companies can't acquire the men and women they need to remain competitive, so they're forced to expand overseas in other countries and offshore jobs rather than expand here in the United States. And thankfully, Mr. Speaker, the solution is simple. Groups from across the spectrum, faith-based groups, including evangelical and Catholic Americans, businesses, including small family farms to large international companies that employ hundreds of thousands of people, law enforcement, all support H.R. 15 based on the Senate bipartisan comprehensive immigration reform bill that would solve all of these issues that we have before us, create jobs for American citizens, reduce our deficit, and as we talk about the budget, at least, frankly, Mr. Speaker, this week we're debating something very important for our country. In other weeks, my colleague, Mr. Garcia, and I have taken to the floor when there's been nothing that's even been done that entire week that had any consequence to anybody. At least this week, Mr. Speaker, we're discussing something important. I don't bemoan that. I think it's legitimate to discuss the budget of our country this week. That's why I think we should stay here another week and discuss immigration next week. But this is an important discussion. But as we look for what we call pay-fors, how do we pay for making sure the Medicare reimbursement rate doesn't go down as scheduled at the end of the year? How do we pay for reducing the sequester? How do we pay for the investments that we want to make? Guess what? Comprehensive immigration reform would fill our coffers with over $200 billion of revenue. Now, how about that as a pay-for what we call the doc fix and making sure we don't reduce Medicare reimbursement rates or any of the other items that are on the budget table this week? That's the kind of contribution that H.R. 15 and immigration reform can make. I yield to my friend from Miami, Mr. Garcia.
Well, I agree with the gentleman from Colorado, and I would point out to by the way, I love the fact you refer to me as a gentleman from Miami. I've always thought we should have our own state. So let me just mention that there's a very good article that was written last year in July by Jennifer Rubin, and it's sort of listed in the Washington Post, and it sort of listed all these phony arguments that we have here. The first, the Senate bill is dead on arrival, right? Well, we've heard this from the Speaker before. We've heard no agreements, no compromises. We heard that VAWA, Violence Against Women Act, was going to be dead, or as they said, they were going to write their own. Well, of course, nothing came, and we passed the Violence Against Women Act, which we should have passed earlier on. Second argument, the Senate bill isn't strong enough on border security. Well, the Senate bill spends more money on border security, almost an insane amount. It's why we took it out of our bill, because we didn't think that this House would look at such an expensive bill. But the question is what we have better than what we're looking at? And of course the answer is no. We're not moving forward. This one is the one I love, but it's more of a Herman Cain type argument. This bill is too long. This is a very complex issue. And of course it's long, because we're trying to solve worker issues, we're trying to solve innovation issues, we're trying to solve a lot of important things that affect us all. The fourth argument, the Obama administration won't enforce it. Well, here I have to say that Obama must be one of anti-immigrants' favorite presidents, because he's deported more people than any president before. In October, I think, we reached 2 million people being deported. That's thousands upon thousands of families destroyed. That's workers being taken out of the economy. That's what the president did.
Will the gentleman yield for a moment?
Yes, of course I'll yield.
Each of those deportations, Mr. Speaker, cost you and I, cost American taxpayers an approximately $15,000. So guess who's paying for the 2 million deportations? Guess what is one of the growing causes of our deficit spending? Our broken immigration system. I'm happy to yield back.
That's exactly right. Another argument, you can't bring in low-skilled workers. Well, the Bracero program proved that when you had a functioning program, illegal immigration went down, not up. We know that for a fact. Here's what we also know. When President Reagan had an immigration bill, we know that the salaries for the middle class and working class went up for 5 years in a row because it worked. The seventh argument, there aren't enough high-skilled workers being allowed in. All right, so let's write legislation that increases the high-skilled labor. Republicans don't need to pass immigration reform because it doesn't affect their House seats. Well, if it doesn't affect their House seats, then why are they opposed to it? And more importantly, this is, of course, the silliest of arguments when you understand the demographics. I know I've spoken to this with the gentleman from Colorado. When you look at the high watermark of Republican presidential races, it was achieved by George Bush, a pro-immigrant president. But when you look behind those numbers and you look at the 44% that he achieved nationally, what you realize is he didn't receive those numbers from second and third generation Americans. He received it from first-generation Americans voting, and voting over 50% for George Bush for president. This is something that's a common-sense thing and makes sense for them. The ninth argument, it passed too quickly in the Senate. Well, unlike the House, they've had long debates on this. They had weeks of hearings. They had bipartisan meetings for over a year before they had the commitment of the President of the Senate, the Majority Leader of the Senate, to get this done. Look, I could go on, but I think what is clear is that we can make a lot of silly arguments, but the time has come to act. We were promised by the Speaker that this would be taken up, and it hasn't. And the time has come to move forward. This is the time for immigration reform. It's good for the country. It's good for these folks. It's good for everyone. I'll yield back to the gentleman from Colorado.
And I'd like to point out that my friend from Miami, Florida, placed out and some of the arguments that we hear our friends making as to why immigration reform hasn't happened. We did not present those as a straw man. We invited our friends from the other side of the aisle to come make their arguments themselves. There is no one here in this chamber, despite our invitation, to represent why we're not staying here next week to vote on immigration reform. So we're guessing it there. We're just sitting here guessing, saying maybe it's because they don't like long bills. I don't know. Do they like a short bill can be pretty bad, too. If it's a bad bill, you can have a good short bill or a bad short bill, a good long bill or a bad long bill. I mean, you know, when you want to address border security, you need to make sure you devote enough of the bill to border security to do it. So we are here guessing at their reasons because our friends on the Republican side are not here to explain, despite our invitation, why they're not bringing immigration reform up. And if they're not ready for H.R. 15 or comprehensive, why at least we're not making some kind of down payment on it next week. Why we're not doing something, for instance, for the Dreamers, the kids that are currently in a deferred action program, so they can have some degree of certainty to get on with their lives. Why we're not making sure that we have working permits for the people who are already here and already have jobs and are an important part of our economy. We could be doing any of that next week, but instead, Mr. Speaker, the House is being sent home on vacation while most Americans have a full additional week to work before Christmas. I'll be happy to yield to the gentleman from Florida.
Well, what I'd like to do is recognize the gentleman from California, which has been joining us and is an ardent fighter for these issues. And as he gets up, I want to sort of relate a story. I was debating the other day a friend on this issue, and he made this what he thought was a common sense argument. Well, Joe, if somebody broke into your house, you'd like them to be arrested, right? And I said, well, the truth is, if somebody broke into my house, filled my refrigerator with fresh fruit and vegetable, if they took care of my mom, got my kid to school, if they went outside and cut the lawn, painted the house, worked on the roof, I think I might owe them money. And the reality is that these folks are an essential part of our country. They make us work and they make us better. And with that, I'll yield to the gentleman from California.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I just wanted to say a few words on this floor that I'm so blessed to be a part of, this great Congress of the United States of America. Yet at the same time, we're a country that talks about how we believe in the big picture, yet at the same time, we focus on the little things. We focus on the plight of a child. We focus on the plight of a family. We focus on the ability for people to pull themselves up by their own bootstraps. That's what we are proud of in this great country. But what I'm not proud of is being part of a Congress where the Speaker, Speaker Boehner, is not allowing comprehensive immigration reform to be voted for on this floor. I believe that today, if we had the opportunity to vote on comprehensive immigration reform in these chambers, that I think we have the votes to pass it. And I think if we did so, it would be much more consistent for us to do that than to do nothing. And that's what this House has been doing. We've been doing nothing on comprehensive immigration reform. And if we did pass comprehensive immigration reform, it would be the biggest economic boon that our country has seen in over 60 years. There are too many Americans out of work. But if we pass comprehensive immigration reform, what we're going to see is for every 100,000 people in this country who are legalized, it's very likely that we're going to have 262,000 jobs occur. Do the math, ladies and gentlemen. If 100,000 people are legalized, a certain percentage of them are going to create businesses. And in those businesses, they're going to hire American citizens. Americans will go to work. That makes sense. That sounds like the American dream for Americans, not just for immigrants who come to our country. One of the things that I'd like to point out is that if comprehensive immigration reform were passed, then what would happen is the federal deficit would go down by $200 billion just over the next 10 years. And over the subsequent 10 years, it would go down by another $700 billion. I think that's good for America. I think that any American, when you look at those numbers, would say, why don't we pass that law? Because when the economy improves, more Americans go to work. As was mentioned earlier by my colleague, you know, when you have a young boy who's an American citizen, who writes a letter to his congressperson, who writes a letter to the President of the United States as an American citizen, who's in tears by telling us, exclaiming that I miss my mother, I miss my father, and they've been deported. That's not an America that we can feel proud of. That's an America that doesn't live its values. Would I say, you know what, if in 2014 we don't vote on comprehensive immigration reform, why don't we just go ahead and dismantle the Statue of Liberty? Because that's something that I think as your average American, we're very proud of. Bring me your huddled masses. You're poor. But you know what's great about this country? Whether you're Italian, whether you're Russian, whether you're Mexican, whether you're English, whether you're Irish, Canadian, when you come to the United States of America, you make dreams come true. Not just your dream, but you employ Americans. You create jobs for American citizens, American-born people. Comprehensive immigration reform, if you try to couch it as those people, comprehensive immigration reform is not about those people. Comprehensive immigration reform is about us Americans. It's about us improving our economy. It's about us doing the right thing. It's about us welcoming the men, women, and children who come to this country and work as hard as any human being will dare to do. And that makes our economy stronger. That makes America great. Ladies and gentlemen, I don't speak to you as though comprehensive immigration reform is an emotional issue. I speak of comprehensive immigration reform as American values issue. And as my colleague said earlier about that silly analogy about, well, what if somebody broke into your house? Then what would you do? But I think he actually put it very well. If somebody painted your house, they cut your grass, they took care of your children and your grandmother, don't you think you owe them something? Don't you think you should extend your hand and say, you know what, welcome, thank you. I like what you're doing for me. And that's what immigrants do for our United States of America. They make our country stronger. This country was built on immigrants. And why in the world would we, as America, as Americans, want to support the idea that they are those people and they are not part of who we are? I'm only one generation away from being an immigrant myself. My parents came from another country. I was born in this country. And I do live a better life than my parents were raised in. And so do my children. I'm proud to be an American-born citizen. And I think that as Americans, we should be proud and expect our United States Congress to have a vote on comprehensive immigration reform and to give that opportunity to the people that you've elected to do our job. And our job is to make our economy stronger. Our job is to make laws that makes this country better. Our job is to be making laws that are true to our values. Thank you.
I'd like to thank the gentleman from California for those wonderful words. I'd like to yield to the gentleman from Colorado.
Thank you. And we have the chair of my committee to file a rule here on the floor of the House. Sadly, it's not a rule for comprehensive immigration reform, but it is a rule for something very important, the budget, which hopefully we'll be able to agree on in the next 2 days. And with that, I would like to yield to the gentleman from Texas.
I thank the gentleman, and in fact, I did come down and ask the gentleman for time. The paperwork has not yet arrived yet, and so we would ask a few more minutes, but thank you very much, and I would yield back to the gentleman. Now,
Reclaiming
thank
my
you for
time,
your
simply let us
consideration.
know, as we discussed earlier before the chair of the Rules Committee joined us, I think we all agree that passing the budget is a very good use of our time here on the floor. Some of us, Mr. Chairman and Mr. Speaker, I address to the Chairman through you, in this hour have talked about the need for immigration reform. We have in the past criticized the apparent urgency with which asbestos bills were somehow rushed out of committee and brought immediately to the floor when we weren't able to move forward in immigration. But this week, Mr. Speaker, we are working on something more important. I am speaking, we have a number of different podiums, Mr. Speaker. Is it the time?
The gentleman's time has expired.
Okay. Well, we need to continue our work to bring up immigration reform. I am speaking from the side of the chamber traditionally used by Republicans. I hope that I will be able to give this particular spot up to a member of the majority party, a Republican, who we hope to continue to extend this invitation to debate immigration reform and bring forward an immigration reform bill.
Well, Mr. Speaker, with that, I know our time is up. I appreciate it, and I yield back to the Speaker.
The gentleman yields back. Wait. For what purpose does the gentleman from Georgia seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I send to the desk a privileged report from the Committee on Rules for filing under the rule.
The clerk will report the title.
Report to accompany House Resolution 438, resolution providing for consideration of the Senate amendment to the joint resolution HJRES 59, making continuing appropriations for fiscal year 2014 and for other purposes, providing for consideration of motions to suspend the rules, providing for proceedings during the period from December 14, 2013 through January 6, 2014, and for other purposes.
Referred to the House calendar and ordered printed.
Referred to the House calendar and ordered printed. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Georgia for a motion.
Mr. Speaker, I move the House do now adjourn.
The question is on the motion to adjourn. Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed say no. The ayes have it. The motion is adopted. Accordingly, the House stands adjourned until 10 a.m. tomorrow for morning hour debate.
The House today debated 5 bills, including one encouraging the Secretary of State to work on an international agreement dealing with international child custody disputes. The Chamber is waiting for legislation on several issues that need to be resolved before the end of the year, including Medicare payments to doctors, the Defense Programs Bill, and the federal budget deal announced yesterday.